Services. Please welcome to the stage, Robin Lloyd.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome once again to PURCO Conference 2024. Selvin, once again, well done on a very well-organized event. I was just calculating backstage that I've had a hiatus of about 8 years since the last time I was at this venue, and as well as organized as ever. The only thing I would maybe request next time is just the weather. If we can just sort that out. But again, I've been very fortunate on this trip to have some of my international colleagues join me from our global organization, and they've been very fortunate to experience all 4 seasons in one day in South Africa, from landing in Joburg to having the spring morning to the heat of the summer in the afternoon, and introduce them to winter in Cape Town. So thank you for that. So I just want to touch on a couple of trends and initiatives that we see happening within the education space. And it's very interesting for me working for a global organization, and you start seeing this picture from outside of the traditional bubble that we live in South Africa, and we get so consumed what we see from day to day. But before I get onto that, just a little bit about who we are. And just in case you're wondering, who's this guy, Robin Lloyd from Redington, and who is Redington? So Redington, we are a global IT distribution company that services 28 markets across Middle East, Turkey, and Africa, with 42 offices across the region, servicing over 19,000 partners across the landscape. So we are really a trusted partner and trusted advisor in the ecosystem. And it's very key that we mention that as how we pertain and how we play in this IT ecosystem that exists in South Africa. So let me take you a bit back. And I would like to just see how this resonates. And as we go through some of these is, if some of you may not, and remember how all of this started and how we charted and how IT started influencing where we are today. Now, you guys will all remember it all started with manual machines and tracking and doing all the stuff, manual labor. But who remembers the first educational machine, the very first educational manual machine? Can anybody, just by a show of hand, remember the abacus? The abacus being the very first educational machine. By a show of hands, who actually used an abacus? Let's look at that. But the abacus was the first inventive machine that started helping us calculate, which then led on to the first move to going on to computing. Now, the inventions of computers, as we all know, literally changed the way we did business as normal. And thanks to the first Intel processor in 1971, we were able to have the first mobile calculator that helped us start calculating and driving computation. Now, that started giving us a whole different view of mobility. Then, fast forward, came the invention of internet. Now, that was a game changer. And again, I don't know if any of you remember, but what was that craze at the time was the internet cafe. Everybody would run off to get their hands on to access the internet and just try and access data. And this really started exposing us as the general layman in terms of data and how we consume data, how we consume news, how we consume technology, and how we were going to start communicating in the way of the world of the future. And then what happened? We said, okay, we've got to go mobile. And the cell phone came out, and we had mobility, and we all had the Nokia 3300 playing Snake until our fingers bled, because that was our entertainment for the day. It wasn't about communication anymore. It was all about the gamification and how we transcribe and how we communicate via short message services, the good old SMS. And that, to be honest, I wouldn't mind going back to those days of the cell phone. Then came Mr. Steve Jobs, and Mr. Steve Jobs said, hold on. I'm now going to put the internet in the palm of everybody's hands. And with that, literally spurred on the digital revolution of how we consume technology and data. So much so that there isn't a device today or a communication tool that doesn't require an application, and we do not use applications, and we drive a whole digital economy and ecosystem. Now, what is the natural progression of mobile applications? Well, mobile applications is transformed from just being on the mobile device, but being to every device in the working place. And that is now spurred on automation. And what has automation done for us? Well, automation has made complex tasks simple. Has freed us up from the monotonous role of getting involved in doing all these autonomous drivers that help us drive business forward. That frees us as the users and the workforce to start focusing on problem solving. Now you'll see there's a little guy there that says AI, and that is the next big thing, artificial intelligence. Now, I'm pretty sure I'd be correct in saying there isn't one person in this room who isn't a little bit nervous about artificial intelligence and what role it's going to play in our future. Now, for me, I see artificial intelligence as the natural progression of automation. And I think we take automation in our everyday lives and what we do as an application, whether it's back-end, front-end, classroom, lecture halls, whether it's in supply chain, logistics, we take that automation for granted. Now, AI, as I mentioned, is not just going to be felt in the classroom or for us as individuals and how we consume, but in everything we do to drive efficiency and how we drive the education system going forward. And that's a big one for us. So what was the education evolution? Now, again, I look at the timeline and the time charts, and I'm pretty sure everybody can put a stamp in their minds and actually go back and visualize exactly when and where all of this happened. 2014, we started seeing improved blending learning models. It was no longer just about the teacher and the student and the good old A4 Croxley notepad. Then fast forward 2016, we started seeing the introduction of adaptive computer-based systems where we started introducing technology into the classrooms or into computer labs, computer centers, and we're trying to figure out just how much technology was going to play in the classroom and in the education system going forward. Then we moved on to technology that started putting technology in the hands of even younger individuals right from before school to saying, how do we start excelling at literacy, putting the device and technology in the hands to say, okay, how do we help these guys drive and learn through technology? But this was spurred on by the Googles and the Apples and the Steve Jobs of the world in terms of driving school-based education. Now we're starting to get to where the really exciting part is cloud-based. There's not one piece of technology in the education system today that does not touch cloud educating in some form, whether it's sharing of documentation, sharing of videos, sharing of learning material, and how the student consumes that. This is where it starts getting exciting, is how do we, from a country, from an education system, start wondering about how culture and authenticity is integrated into our learning system, because all of a sudden, our education system is exposed and technology is exposing literacy to many people across the country. And that includes different languages, different cultures. How do we start doing this in a quick changing world? So fast forward, and where do we see this by 2028? The schools and the education systems that start lagging behind are really going to find themselves at a real left-behind pace in such that nobody will be able to keep up. In the sense of those who have versus those who have not is going to start creating a lot of fragmentation and segmentation in society in terms of how we access this data. So what does that look like? I mean, we see we've got the EdTech trends. So it all starts with the chatbots, giving the students access to quick questioning, quick logging tickets, asking for help, asking through systems, and giving them exposure to teachers and not necessarily via the classroom. We've seen an explosion through virtual learning. Machine learning and AI is going to become incredibly important, and this is going to lead to the classroom evolution of 4.0. So what does the current education landscape look like to us as Redington, as a global organization, and we look at it from the outside? Well, we can see quite evidently that there's the widening of the socioeconomic gaps. As much as effort in that is going in to try and close these gaps, we see it getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And that is making it very difficult for all individuals to get the same quality education. We know, and this is, we don't have to speak too much about it, but we know there is a critical shortage in terms of teachers. How do we then give students access to these curriculums, making sure they get quality-based education, and putting them on the same level as the classroom student? And then I'd probably reach out on a limb and say it's fair to say I think our curriculum is a little bit old-fashioned. And maybe not so much in the curriculum that's old-fashioned, but how we apply our teachings to the curriculum. And I think, you know, again, we've always had a memorization version of learning over critical thinking and problem solving, and driving those practical skills that help define critical outcomes. And dare I say it, and I've heard it just in my previous speaker mention, infrastructure. Infrastructure is so important. And again, I don't have to be the expert to tell you that a lot of our infrastructure is outdated. Never mind saying in some areas we don't even have infrastructure. Does our classrooms and lecture halls allow for us to drive the curriculum of the future and the classroom of the future? And there it comes down to many schools today just lack the basics of libraries, labs, even basic things of internet connectivity. And that's why technologies like Starlink are going to be game changers. They literally, as much as there's resistance in our South African market today, Starlink is a desperate need for our rural areas in terms of internet connectivity. So what are we doing as Redington to address what we call EdTech friction? So we know that innovation is outracing adoption. Now, it's not all bad news. So what we call as the friction is the space between the innovation and the adoption, and you can see that gap is widening and widening over time. What is good news for South Africa is South Africa, whilst we are late adopters to any technology, we certainly are accelerated adopters. So once we get access to the technology, we supersede most global markets in terms of technology adoption. So that's exciting. And that's positive, but how do we drive that in a meaningful way to make sure that everybody benefits in the right pockets? Now, having said that, it's a way does Redington play in this space. So Redington makes sure that we align with the leading global vendors to ensure we bring these technologies to the front, and working through our reseller partner channel to make sure that we can equip the classrooms of tomorrow, bring the technologies to the front, and not only about the classroom, but in back-end infrastructure, managed infrastructure, cloud-based solutions. And that's why solutions for us, like the Ubuntu framework with AWS, become so important in terms of managing this. Now, interestingly, when I talk about adoption, to give you an idea, when it comes to cloud adoption, South Africa is the leading adopter of cloud-based technologies globally. We see a compounded annual growth rate of 20% year on year from cloud adoption in South Africa. That far supersedes any other global territory in terms of adoption. Now, with that, what's the next thing you say? Okay, well, if we're adopting cloud, what becomes the next big thing for us? Well, how secure is my data? How secure is my data on the cloud? And this is where we've got to start thinking of outside of the classroom and how we secure all these things and make sure the infrastructure is managed, and that's where Redington comes in. So if you take cloud adoption driving at 20%, cybersecurity adoption is only climbing at 7.9% annually. So we foresee a huge boom in cybersecurity adoption that's going to be required inside of not only the university institutions, educational systems, corporate institutions, but the like. And there's a big role to play in terms of how we manage and secure that data, and that is our biggest threat. So what do we see as the future of education then? Well, I think we can all agree that it's going to be personalized and hybrid. Now, when we mention hybrid, I think we all have the luxury when we talk in the corporate world, we say hybrid, hey, that means we work from home. But hybrid education doesn't mean that's going to be teaching from home. Hybrid education is how do we blend all these technologies and traditional classroom learning in one go. So you've got technology and traditional learning in one form factor. Now, some stats is, during the COVID-19 pandemic, it was estimated that there were at least 1.5 million students worldwide that were unable to attend classes. Now, if we look back and just think about that impact on every learner and take that back into a local context, that is massive. And we saw it through COVID, how we had to change and accelerate our learning methods through this pandemic. Once you've gone through that, there's no going back. What's the new norm? What's the new normality? How do we drive that going forward? That led us to digitally transforming education. So we'll start seeing, and we're already seeing it, more accelerated technologies in VR and AR, and that's going to pave the way for incredible things in terms of interactive learning. We're already seeing it globally on the engineering front when it comes to medicine and those kind of practices. But not, again, as I said, is having that technology not just on campus, but how students going to learn outside of the classroom with those technologies. And again, intelligent education, access to AI, big data, there's just going to be an abundance of data around for students. Now that means, how do we unlock this knowledge for everybody, everywhere in the future? How do we give access to all these students with this data overload, making sure that it's verified data and making sure that it's trustworthy data? And how do we integrate that into our systems, but not only, again, from the classroom, back-end processes, supply chain logistics, enrollment, admin duties. How do we make sure that this data is managed and secure? So this is what the trends look like, and this is what all the data is telling us. There's going to be immersive learning models, enabling education and exploration of concepts in terms of applications in medicine, history, science, all through virtual and augmented reality. I mentioned earlier hybrid learning that blends the traditional and online learning for personalized instruction, and that is incredible, personalizing instruction for our learners. And how now do we increase the technology integration into that classroom? Then we've got the micro-learning and nano-learning. And I think we can all agree this is a big one. And this is not just for students. I think we're seeing it in our daily lives, is the involvement of continuous learning. Continuous learning is the biggest driver, not only from us, from kids to students, to us in our adulthood, but how do we start getting this quick, bite-sized learning modules for the busy students? And are we ready for, by the time that those kids come through the school system, into varsity in terms of this nature and business and driving that forward? And that's going to be packed, because the student of the future is going to be very different, very, very different. And there we go. I mean, we know today, accessible via mobile devices on the go. Everybody has a device in their hand. Everybody has access to data in their hand. Have they got access to the correct data? Have they got the access to factful data? Is it the correct data? And hyper-personalized learning, again, data-driven education systems, and this is where AI plays a big part, is starting to look at the student as an individual and giving them educational instruction based on the individual need and individual requirement. And this will go a long way in enhancing learning efficiencies and effectiveness. And again, how do we apply that and bring that into the lecture hall? Gamification. And maybe some of us just will never get it, but that's the drive of the future, gamification. And how do we make these learnings interactive, rewarding, and not just about the degree at the end, but inspiring to continually learn and continue seeking out knowledge and driving that information-based education system. So before I end, I wanted to end on this quote. And this is a quote that's been in the news quite a bit in the last week and a bit around AR. And I think this can resonate with a lot of us. Is I want AR to do my laundry and dishes so that I can do art and writing, not for AR to do my art and writing. And I think that resonates with all of us. Is if we can apply AR and manage it in the correct, responsible way, it frees up so much potential for us as individuals from being creative, collaborating, and focused on problem-solving solution outcomes, as opposed to focusing on doing the fun stuff. We've got to make sure that AR drives and delivers the mundane tasks, and we can focus our efforts elsewhere. But remember, AI is only as important and effective as the data that you put in and where it's pulling the data from. So it's incredibly important that we manage that AI data and secure it correctly. Because I foresee AI getting smart and smarter and smarter and learning and keeps on continuing learning, but if it's only learning from itself, is it getting smarter? So AI will only be as smart as the data that you keep feeding into the system. So we've got to make sure that that is correct. And on that note, thank you for the time. Have a wonderful conference, and thank you once again.
Sorry, can you take a question or two?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. Round of applause, please, for Robin Lloyd from Redington SA. He was quite efficient with his use of time, so we have moments of reflections and questions you might have for him. All you have to do is indicate, and the gentleman at the back will rush through with some microphones to your table so that you can ask the question. Perhaps if I can just kick off with one or two that I have. I agree with you. Schools which are lagging behind in adopting technology, really, they're going to be left way, way behind. But that is, as we appreciate in South Africa, a factor of income inequality and socioeconomic challenges we talk about on a daily basis. How do we help in that scenario?
So, again, Africa, I think, as I mentioned earlier, it is how do we create vehicles that allows access to the technology through affordable technological means? Now, whether that means in terms of creating internet connectivity, because that's always the start. How do we help and assist our schooling infrastructure and system support and driving those? And that is about working with key corporates and players and global vendors and the likes of the Googles and the Apples and the Amazons in terms of using the corporate social responsibility to drive an educational factor. I think too much, this might be controversial what I say, but I think we spend too much time focusing our efforts on the higher level instead of grassroots. I think we've got to start putting a lot more effort and focus into grassroots education so it starts the system early, so the expectation starts driving through. We forget about the kids at the bottom. We try and all focus on the top cream of the crop. And for me, I think as us as Redington, we've got to, coming into South Africa as a global organization, we've got a responsibility to play in those pockets and support and drive educational systems and bringing technology to the front.
The previous speaker made reference to shared services and how perhaps we should look to work across universities and institutions. I imagine this would be one of those areas where that would be possible, right?
Very, very much so, and I think that is where, and we can chat about it in a lot more detail if you come past our stand, particularly with the AWS partnership and this Ubuntu Net framework in terms of cloud infrastructure coverage for the higher educational space. And I think, come have a conversation, we'll dig deeper into that and how we can, because that will certainly start giving shared community and shared services in terms of access to certain tools and technologies.
And then you mentioned earlier that innovation is outpacing adoption. And I did smile when you said once we adopt it in South Africa, we accelerate adoption beyond any other market, which is good. However, universities and colleges generally take a while to get to the point where plans have been proposed, budgets have been approved, and the implementation of whatever it is that we're planning, right, as far as infrastructure. If we accept that innovation is outpacing adoption, why would I probably know the answer to this, but why should I invest in something now that I'm only going to realize in 3 years' time, by which time that technology will be outdated because something else would have actually replaced it?
So I think mean time to adoption certainly affects your cost of adoption over the long run. So the earlier you start adopting technologies, the quicker you keep up with the pace of future technologies, and it's a lot less costly to keep up with the pace of technologies than it is to put it off and say, well, do I invest now? Am I putting the cart before the horse, so to speak? Now, it's not an easy as tick box item and say, well, let's go and just invest and do it. But I think it's the right consultation, making sure you're investing in the right areas within your ecosystem and making sure you've got the right technologies going forward that are bulletproof for future-proofing in terms of the technologies that would come. And again, if it's how long is a piece of string? We don't know what technology is going to look like in 10 years from now. We've got a fairly good idea of where it could go. But if your adoption rate and adoption time is early, the speed in which you can continue innovating becomes a lot more friction-free in terms of what you do.
Jan Vermeulen from My Broadband agrees with you on Starlink, by the way. We need to start accepting that it's coming to South Africa because there are certainly far-flung areas of South Africa that will need Starlink in order for them to gain access to connectivity. Yeah. Any questions for Robin? Are you satisfied? Oh, there's a question. Do you mind standing up, sir, so that they can see you? If you can introduce yourself, where you're from, and then the question for Robin.
Hi, Robin. Thanks for the presentation. Very insightful. I'm Brian Iker, Global Higher Education Consultant. Your reference to COVID driving a lot of what you consider to be the new normal was kind of a big hit when COVID was on. And a lot of that dissipated over time in terms of EdTech and universities embracing what they did during COVID. What do you believe, apart from all the hard stuff like the hardware, software, cloud infrastructure, what are some of the soft issues that has impeded some of the big wins that you mentioned that came around COVID time? What has impeded that kind of, accelerated growth? Just the soft issues, like, for example, the change management and some of that stuff. Thanks, Robert.
Sure. Sure, good question. And I sometimes think I'd have to go into psychology to answer that. But yeah, I think it's certainly demands, and not necessarily the demands from infrastructure, like say the hard stuff and PCs and that. It's the demands that have come in from the student base in terms of the expectation of what their classroom and the learning and type should be. Whether it is the access to information, how they consume information, and are we ready to deliver that kind of learning into that access of information. So I don't know if I'm going to answer your question directly, because I would need to think about that a little bit harder. But I certainly think that, again, infrastructure aside, the way of learning's changed. COVID created a new norm for how we consume and how we educate. We were all impacted from whether it was our kids, our students, whether in varsity, primary school, high school. We were all impacted in one way or another and driving through that kind of learning system. And when that happened, we thought we were going back to the normal. Although we went back to the classroom, the consumption normality was no longer there. How we consumed data, how we had to keep educating the children changed. Now, are all our classrooms ready for that today? By no means, not at all. I think some schools are better off than others, but there goes those socio-economic gaps that we talk about. And those are the soft things. I think it's the anxieties, the stress levels, the teacher capability. Are the teachers able to teach in the new norm and the new normal way? Because it was not a learning style that was taught when they were doing their education system. So those are the soft elements that I think are going to start coming through and are going to start accelerating. And I think, again, when you look at that graph in terms of adoption versus innovation, it's those things. Our adoption rate is low because we don't know. We just don't know how to educate at this space. How do we shorten that? And then we've got to start by continuous learning and continuous educating to bring that gap closer together. I know it's a long-winded kind of answer to your question, maybe not direct, but happy to have a debate with you at the booth.
Certainly a good question, without a doubt. I am not seeing another...
there we go, we got one.
Two hands. Okay, these are going to be the last two. We're going to go with, if you don't mind standing up so that they can see you. Once again, your introduction and your question, please.
Thank you, Robin. This is Tebogo Rakhatla, the head of PURCO Data Management. It's a fascinating presentation that you did, but from my side, I just want to find out the ethical consideration, considering that you are an international organization. Have you looked into how you're going to address those. South Africa is a totally different, ball game, if I have to say, as compared to the international community. And also the adoption of, the artificial intelligence and all of the other, elements of the 4IR has to talk to where we are and where we think we are going. So we already in the, entering the 5IR, which is the looking into the relationship between the 4IR, which is the technological elements, as well as the human elements. So the question is, are you looking into South Africa on its own basis with elements that will address the ethical issues? Because our schooling environment is totally different. Our headspace is operating from a totally different headspace from the rest of the world. We are a developing economy. Thank you.
That's a key question because he's got his global team here, but he's the country head for South Africa.
Yeah.
So he needs to be literally dealing with those things you're asking.
100%. And that is a great question. I'm glad you asked that one because that is something I deal with on a daily basis, is educating back upstream globally, because we have this global picture. But South Africa, I can honestly say from seeing it outside, is like no other place in the world. Positively, not negatively, positively. But in some ways, and Africa, you may have seen it, we sometimes as South Africans live in our own bubble. We really are our own, and I think it's because of our history, our past, and our legacy that we've had to get on by ourselves as South Africans. So when I look at our market versus the other markets, you are 100% correct. We are so different. But because we are global in investment and investing in this country, it is about narrowing that gap and making sure that our solutions are South African ready and not just global ready. But what is nice, I've got one of my colleagues who's doing a talk in one of the breakout sessions in room 3 to share some learnings from one of the other universities and where our technologies and solutions are in place. And hopefully we can take some global learnings out of that, because I think there's a lot that we can learn. But it's all about customizing, because it's not a copy and paste. There's not one size fits all. And certainly in South Africa, it's not one size that fits all for everybody in South Africa. It is multifaceted. It's an exciting poikikos pot of different recipes going in, but we've got to come out with education-based solutions that satisfy the need of every individual.
Is that the Central University of Technology? The university?
Yeah.
Because that's room 4.
Oh, no, it's VJ in room 3, but I'll double check.
Stunning. Okay, never mind. Let's take our final question from you, sir.
Oh, thank you very much. It's not a question, just a comment. Because I think the point about requesting AI to do laundry and dishes, it looks like a joke.
Yeah.
But actually, it's already happening.
Yeah.
And I think one of the mistakes we make is we don't see these things as they happen until it's too late.
And you look back.
Today, I can order, well, not me, my refrigerator can check what is in the refrigerator and order the stuff I need and have it delivered at home without me moving a hand. So basically, it's there, it's here.
Yeah.
But we as a higher education sector seem either not, I don't know what to say, the word to say, but we seem devoid of the current happenings and how we take advantage of them. In 2021, we spoke of a global risk report. What we do at the university, we do a global risk report in relation to the university, and AI was one of the key risks, they said. Risks. Reason being, because everybody at the university was thinking AI was becoming a problem because of ChatGPT. And yet, the tool could be used by universities themselves for the same purpose.
Yeah.
You know, and we are here, 2024, we have not moved, by the way.
So look at it from this positive standpoint. If we go back, and I'll show you that innovation versus adoption chart again. When we talk about AI, we are literally at day 0. We haven't even got anywhere close to the capability and the possibility of where AI is going. We are in the embracing stage of still trying to understand AI and what's going to happen and how we're going to manage it. But taking, like I said, having that mindset and putting the right thought process in how we're going to adopt these technologies so that it does the right things, so that we are now proactive versus reactive. Because by the very nature of what we do with technology, we are always reactive. We resist it and we resist it and we resist it until it's forced upon us. How do we embrace it so that we don't have to go back and start customizing and managing it? How do we embrace it from the beginning in terms of the right ways to make sure that we get the successful outcomes that we want to drive? And we influence AI, and AI is not influencing us.
It certainly explains why I had empathy for Ultron in Avengers: The Age of Ultron, because that was generative AI in some way that literally just went out of control.
Yeah.
So what started as good intention, actually in a very nice, and that makes sense, I can understand how you got there kind of scenario, turned evil. And we need to free ourselves of that, it's danger, 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 and start embracing the opportunity, I think, that comes with it.
Yeah.
Professor, thank you very much. And Robin, thank you very much. A round of applause, please.
Thank you, Africa.